Well, welcome everyone to A Taste of Irish Slow Living. I'm very excited to have our host, Catherine Fulvio, here today. My name is Anna Moulet. I'm the Executive Director of Slow Food USA. Slow food, I think many of you know, but is a global grassroots movement dedicated to good, clean, and fair food for all. We envision a world where all people can eat food that is good for them, good for the people who grow it, and good for the planet. And here in the US, we have over 100 local chapters, and we're actually wrapping up our September membership drive right now. So if you're not a member, this is a great time to join Slow Food, and we'll put a link in the chat about what membership means. So here we are with Slow Food Live. We started Slow Food Live, this series, last March, actually, as a way to bring people together, to bring slow food into homes in the midst of the pandemic. And I wanted to give a big shout out to Truly Grassfed, who's helped us with this particular series focused on slow dairy, and for connecting us with Catherine. We have, this is the first of a series of 3 with Truly Grassfed. So next up, we are hosting a grilled cheese cook-off, and we are also hosting a session on compound butters. So lots of exciting sessions coming up, lots of deliciousness to come to your screen. We have some sessions on wine, sustainable wine as well. Okay, so throughout the session, you can follow the recipe at the link that we'll put in the chat box. Please put your questions and comments in the chat, and we'll get to them as we go. Catherine has a wonderful presentation and recipe to present today, but you know, if you have questions, I can jump in and ask, and we can just have a conversation as we go. I think that is all my housekeeping. I want to now introduce you to Catherine. Irish chef Catherine Fulvio is an award-winning author of 6 cookbooks, founder of the Ballyknocken House of Cookery and School, and a celebrated television host on both sides of the Atlantic. She is kicking off our series from the kitchen of her family farmhouse in County Wicklow, Ireland. Catherine champions high-quality local produce with a commitment to seasonal ingredients. She grew up on a working farm on the east coast of Ireland, from where she now runs a cookery school. So the fundamentals of slow food, to be sustainable, to preserve biodiversity, have been at the heart of her family home for as long as she can remember. So Catherine, I'm so pleased to welcome you, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Anna, and welcome everybody. Hi to everybody over in the United States in particular, because I'm over here in Ireland, and I'm thrilled to see that there's Irish people on as well over here in Dublin and Waterford. I just saw that popping up. Welcome to my farmhouse kitchen. I'm delighted to be here with Truly Grassfed today, and I really wanted to show you and paint a picture for you, and I hope those from Dublin and Waterford will back me up on this, but I wanted to paint a picture for you for what our landscape is here in Ireland. So if you can just picture lots and lots of beautiful valleys of green grass, and we're very fortunate because we have, I will say fortunate, but if you ask any Irish person, we don't think we are. We do have enough rain, but we have a lovely blend of sunshine as well. So we actually have quite a mild climate in Ireland, which is perfect for growing. So we have this mix of rain and sunshine, which means we have regular grass growth, which means we can leave our animals out grazing on this grass. So grass-fed butter, grass-fed cheese is all part of our life here in Ireland. We have, on average, with Truly Grassfed, about two cows for every acre spread out. And the company works with 3,000 farmers. They know all the farmers, and you will laugh, but all the farmers know all their cows. Now, I can honestly say that because we were dairy farmers here on our family farm for over 100 years. And yeah, my dad had names on all the cows. I personally had trouble recognizing some of them because a lot of them were just black and white, but they were like family pets. So I grew up in the environment where we produced our own milk and took the cream off of that. And from that, we used to make our own butter. And then we would sell also our milk to the dairy that now is Truly Grass-fed. So it is a passion of mine, I have to say. And one of my first childhood memories is a big, thick slice of what we call batch bread. Like it's big, thick bread with butter just slathered all over it. So that for me is slow food living. It's producing our own food as much as possible, eating from our own environment as much as possible, supporting our own local farmers and artisanal producers and growing what we can and taking time to make some nice food. So I should really stop talking and start baking. What I wanted to show you today was a gorgeous caramelized leek Irish soda bread. I have gorgeous naturally aged cheddar in there too. And the first thing I need to do is prepare my leek. So I have here from the garden a leek, and I'm just going to top and tail it. And then with the leek, a good way to wash it is just to cut it down the center. Can you see that? I'm just going right into the center there. And then you can fan it out like this. You see, you're getting a cooking lesson now, look. You can fan it out like this, and then you run it from the root end downwards under the cold tap, and that washes out any grime that may have gathered from the garden, any bit of soil. So excuse me while I'm at the sink here making noise. And I have my hob ready, and now all I need to do is just chop my leek. So for chopping, for those of you that are new to this, knuckles forward, fingertips back, let the back of the knife do all the hard work. So in we go. So you're just getting skinny slices of leek, and just keep creeping your fingers back. And then we're going to just fry this off in some beautiful salted butter. Just before you came on, I was joking that in Ireland, unsalted butter is rarely part of our food culture because salt was the preserver of butter. You know, in Ireland, in centuries gone by, butter was a currency. So it was traded for other food. It was used to barter, but it was highly prized. And we exported Irish butter all around Europe. But how we preserved our butter was in salt, and then we wrapped it, and then we would keep it in a cool area in the bogs in Ireland. There you go, information overload possibly, but it is very much part of our culture. So now, here we have our leeks. Let's get some butter. So we have here the Truly Grassfed salted butter, but there is unsalted. But I always joke when an Irish person let me just say me rather than I speak on behalf of all Irish people. But if I'm following a US recipe, I always still use salted butter. So I always have to moderate and make sure I don't put too much salt in the balance of the recipe. So what I wanted to show you was, I spoke to you about the grass-fed butter and the grass-fed animals. That's what results in, so you're not getting a good view of it because of the light, but can you see how yellow the butter is? That is because of grass-fed animals. So when the cattle are out grazing in the field, there's just a little bit of butter, by the way. When they're grazing in the field, they have the herbs, they have the grass, and it in turn gives us this beautiful yellow colored butter and beautiful cheese. And oh my goodness, the cream is to die for. Absolutely lovely. It's particularly nice with an Irish coffee, I must say. So now we're just melting our butter there. And then we want to slow cook these leeks. So when we get our butter down, I want to watch my temperature here on the hob. I don't know if you can see, I have it fairly low down. So we'll just give that a little shimmy round. And then let's get in our leeks. And we're just going to slow cook those leeks. There are some I've made earlier. I'm sure you don't have time to stand here watching me cook leeks, although this is slow food. So, but I'm sure you don't have 2 hours for me. So we just give this a little turn in the butter. Now, why do I cook in butter? So when you're cooking in butter, all you've got to remember is moderate your temperature, because you don't want the beautiful milk solids in the butter to burn. But the butter gives you this such a gorgeous flavor that's worth using, and maybe even with a tiny bit of oil if you needed to, if it was a higher heat. But for me, keep your heat nice and low and just slow cook in the butter, and you'll have the most beautiful flavored leeks. And this is really nice just as it is, mixed in later with an omelette either, with some of that beautiful grated cheddar cheese. So I'm just going to leave that on a low heat here, and I can move on then with the rest of the recipe if you're okay with that. So we can just clean down now. And I just want to chop some sun-dried tomatoes, not Irish, but I wanted to give just a little flavor. That said, I do grow in my hothouse some tomatoes, but you note I did say hothouse, because do you remember I was saying about the Irish weather? It doesn't get that hot that I can have that much outside, like I wouldn't have peaches or grapes growing here outside. But I have lovely figs and I have lovely pears in my garden, and we've just harvested our apples. So it is all about beautiful fresh produce. So for the sun-dried tomatoes, I'm just going to chop them nice and small, and then you'll have this lovely fleck of red throughout your beautiful bread. And in a minute then I'm going to explain to you all about soda bread and where we're going with this recipe. So that's the first thing. The next thing in preparation of the recipe is the herbs. So what works really well with the aged cheddar cheese is a selection of herbs. And I brought in from the garden, I don't know if you can see, I'll bring them up closer to you. This is tarragon straight from the garden, and it absolutely smells so beautiful. It's that lovely light anise flavor. So I think you'd really like that, and it works really nicely with the Truly Grassfed aged cheddar. But also I have here some thyme. Now in the recipe I've mentioned thyme, and you can see it's getting into the woody stage now. So your stalks at this time of the year, well, here anyway, tend to be quite woody. So you use only the leaves. Now earlier in the spring, you could use the stalks as well for this. So to use your thyme, you can just hold your stalk like this and you just pull down. And there's something really special about fresh herbs. It's just the aroma and the depth of flavor that they bring to this. And I would imagine if you're tuning in for the date on the compound butters, that you will come across plenty of use of fresh herbs in compound butters, because it's a marriage made in heaven. I'm going to actually put some of the tarragon in as well, because I just feel it's going to be so nice with it. And when I have it, I'm going to use it. So I'm just going to give that a wee chop up. And then when we've got that chopped, we're good to go. So I chose the soda bread because it's very traditional Irish. And because I'm here in my farmhouse kitchen, I wanted to make sure that I was showing you something that's traditionally Irish, because I know many of you tuned in today will have Irish roots. But I also wanted to show you something that's very much a farmhouse recipe. So let me just move this out of the way, and I will use that in a second. And we move on to our flour. Now, I mentioned soda bread being a farmhouse tradition. We make soda bread in Ireland because our flour is actually a lower gluten flour. Now, you're not to worry. Your cake flour would be fine for this job, but not the kind of flour you use to make a sourdough or a pizza that has too much gluten in it. So traditionally in Ireland, with our softer flour, we use baking soda. We call it bread soda. And you'll be surprised to know that here in Ireland, we buy it in 2-pound bags in the supermarket. When my husband is from Sicily, and when I go to Sicily to recreate this recipe, I have to go to the pharmacy and get the soda in these tiny little sachets, because they sell it there for stomach ailments, not for cooking. So yes, go buy soda to make your soda bread. Bicarbonate of soda, baking soda is what you call it. This here is the Irish flour. I'm going to bring it up to you. It's a lovely soft flour. It's so nice. It's so gorgeous, and it's an unbleached flour as well. And there's some wonderful flour millers here in Ireland now, straight off the farm too. And it ties very much in with our Truly Grass-Fed message. So now, other dry ingredients that go in. Salt. Oh, you always need a little bit of salt in bread. The next thing I want to get is a little spoon here. And here I have my baking soda. So I'm going to pop my baking soda onto my hand. I want to show you the way my grandmother always did it. Baking soda tends to lump. So we don't put any anti-caking agent in here in Ireland. So you can run this, you can sift it, run it through a sieve, or the way we've always done it in the farmhouse is we pop it on the palm of our hand and use the back of the spoon to press it down, and that gets rid of the lumps. So it's important that you measure the soda exactly per the recipe. Too much soda and you will have a kind of a green hue to your bread. It's not so nice. In my cooking school, a few years ago, I was teaching a lovely group from Germany, and I said to them, it's really important you measure your soda exactly. You need a level teaspoon of soda, I said. And a couple of the guys down the back put in 11 teaspoons of soda. Can you believe it? It was a total disaster. Anyway, so 1 level teaspoon of soda generally in a soda bread recipe. So we have it in here. So we have our salt in, our soda, and now we pop in our sugar. Just a little bit of sugar to sweeten, that's all. Next, you get your hands in and you aerate. See? So there will be kind of a flour. Look at this. I am making a bit of a mess here. Try and get it back into the bowl when you're doing it. But I find this a lovely way because it gives you a feel for the dough as well when you do it this way. Can you still see me? Woohoo! There we go. So now the next thing I want to put in is my butter. So I have my butter already diced up. So here's my lovely, gorgeous yellow butter. So I just popped it into dices and I'm going to get it in here. This is my salted butter, my Truly Grassfed salted butter. Luckily that was not glass. Now what I do is I coat the butter with the flour, you see, just like this. here, as you can see. And then with my fingertips, I push the butter into the flour. So what I want is for the butter to totally disappear into the flour. What I'm doing is I'm just coating the flour with a little bit of butter. This is going to give me a softer bread and more flavor to my bread. It also will help my bread last longer. That is, if there's not like about 6 people in your house where it won't last a wet week. I grew up on this bread. My grandmother used to make the brown soda bread in our farmhouse. And my mother opened one of Ireland's farmhouse bed and breakfasts. So we were out helping Dad on the farm, milking the cows, or else we were in helping in the B&B. So fresh farmhouse bread was so important to us. So every day we would have the brown soda bread. We also made a white bread, a version like this, with raisins in it, which was absolutely delicious. And then my mum started putting grated cheddar cheese in as well. Not with the raisins, but she would put the cheese in with apricots. Very, very nice combination. So you can play with this recipe as you want. I want you to look at this recipe and think, what else could you do with it? So let's just rub it in here now. I want to show you. So now my mix is more like, I would say, breadcrumbs, barely breadcrumbs. You see? You can see that there. So you've got your butter well rubbed in there. Now it's time to get the rest of our ingredients in. So here are my leeks that I cooked off earlier, so I can pop those in, and I'm going to toss them in the flour. And then I'm going to put in my sun-dried tomatoes and my lovely herbs. And I'm sure you're already sitting at home thinking, gosh, I would like to see X, Y, or Z in mine. I'm sure there's other ingredients that you'll be happy to use yourself here. But I love the combination of the sweetness of the leeks and the saltiness of the natural aged, the sharp cheddar, which is absolutely gorgeous. So giving this a coat. So always coat with the flour mix when you pop in your ingredients like this. Some people like to put caraway seeds in soda bread. Interestingly, that's a recipe that was in Ireland about 150 years ago. It left Ireland around the time of the famine. So if you're living in the US and it's a recipe that you've come across with caraway seeds in it, that's a very old recipe. So that'd be interesting. I'd love to hear your comments on that shortly. So there we go. We've got that in now. You have a choice of cheeses here. You've got your naturally aged, and then you've got your naturally sharp. So you can go with either cheese that you prefer. I'm going with the naturally sharp because I do like that extra mature cheese. So I'm popping that in, and I've grated that already. So in that goes. So I think you can see where this recipe is going. I mean, you can't go too far wrong with fresh herbs, sun-dried tomatoes, beautiful sharp cheddar cheese, and some caramelized leeks. Now, the next part of this recipe, this is the part I need you to kind of practice yourself a little bit. You can use buttermilk, you can use sour milk. So in the farmhouses years ago in Ireland, they would have used sour milk because that was the most available to them. Or you can have regular milk and put some lemon juice in, and I can tell you it will sour really quickly. But you can also use natural yogurt or natural yogurt mixed with fresh milk. The point is you need something sour, because that sourness reacts with the bicarbonate of soda, your baking soda, bubbles form and bread rises. How much liquid you use will absolutely depend on the quantity of butter that went in with your leeks. So in other words, if your mix already a little wet, you got to be careful. Or it'll also depend on how well you measured out your ingredients. So what you need to do is just learn the texture. So let me show you that. So you make a little well here and you pour in your liquid. Oh, I want to give that a little stir around. I mixed natural yogurt with my fresh milk, and my yogurt is just at the base, and that by mixing it now, I'm just getting a slightly dense consistency, which is very nice for this recipe. So in we go. Now, never put in all the liquid, start bit by bit. Hold your bowl with one hand and one hand mixing, and just toss the dry ingredients in on top of the wet. So the trick in making a good soda bread is no kneading. So you're literally just mixing with your fingertips. See the way I'm doing this? This is an important technique, because if you knead this, you push all the air out and you'll have a much denser dough and therefore a much denser bread. And then you just pour in a little bit more wet liquid where the dough looks dry. So this is beginning to come together, but I can see at the base it's still a little dry. So in we go with another little bit of the liquid. And I think we're nearly there now. Yes, here we go. It's coming together. So you persevere with your fingertips, turning the bowl, mixing with one hand. You will end up with half a loaf on one hand. That's why we washed our hands beforehand. I never use a wooden spoon for this particular job because you overmix it with a wooden spoon. So the little techniques in getting this right. Can I just tell you, it smells divine. Absolutely beautiful at this point. Now, the next thing you need is some flour on your work surface. And we'll just pop this out onto the work surface, and I'm going to knead it. And I'm wondering at this point, has anybody any questions while I'm kneading the dough?
This is wonderful, Chef. I can just picture my 6-year-old son aerating the flour. It looks like a fun activity for kids. We do have a few questions. One is, you know, you said when you have it, I'm going to use it. And I wonder what some of your other favorite combinations are for soda bread.
Oh, combinations. I make a lovely one with apricots. Like I said to you, apricots and the cheddar cheese, but I soak the apricots in whiskey beforehand. It's really nice. And I make a sweet soda bread with a bit more of the butter in it. And then I dice up some pears and I add in some ground almonds and some caramelized ginger. Oh my goodness, it's so gorgeous. So it's a sweeter soda bread. I would have that one with jam. I make my rhubarb and ginger jam here in Ballyknocken. So that would be one I'd have with jam. So this particular recipe can be sweet or savory. You just adjust the quantity of salt and sugar that you're putting in. And you can roll with this recipe for sure. See the way I'm just
We have a question from Edna asking for the lactose intolerant. Do you recommend any substitutions for that milk?
For the lactose intolerant, I know I'm not sure in the US what you can get, but I know this particular company, the Truly Grassfed company here in Ireland, also have lactose-free cheese and milk and butter that we can use in our cooking here. But I don't know in the US whether that's possible or not.
Mm-hmm. And one broader question maybe you can talk about as you're kneading is to talk to us about what is it about Ireland that really does well with slow food and this concept of slow living? Is there something in the environment or in the culture or in the history that helps Irish communities really embrace slowness?
So that's a really good question, Anna, to be honest, because when you think back about Ireland, we're a nation of poets and singers and authors. You know, we're known for entertaining each other, and it all goes back to how we lived through the generations where we would call into each other's houses and we would sing and dance and tell stories through the night. And it was very much about local community. Like even just back to my mother's generation, there were actually dances at the crossroads. And I know that might sound quite touristy to some people here in Ireland, but it did happen. But nowadays, we are still very much about community. We're very much about, you know, our neighbors, our friends, our family, looking out for each other, stopping on the streets, having long chats with each other. So slowness, it's about how we live. And then when you start looking at our food, we're a small island, really. We think we're huge, but we're a small island. But we punch above our weight in food production because we make some really great, authentic products straight from the land. And there's goodness in them. And you'll see that in the butter and the cheese today. You know, it's just pureness. And we in Ireland really appreciate that. And then the other point is, many of us are from a few generations of farmers, you know, and we might now be living in Dublin, but maybe our grandparents were farmers. So many of us really understand where food comes from in Ireland. We still have that close connection with the land, and that's important too. And if we don't, we're certainly out in the countryside at weekends enjoying it, you know. So yes, that's our lifestyle. Now, back to the kneading. Did you see the way I was just gently kneading? I'm only pushing it together, that's all. I'm not kneading. I'm just gently pushing because I want to keep the dough intact without pushing all that air out. You know, I didn't go to all that trouble of mixing with one hand only to find it's all gone. So it really is a gentle texture at this stage. just to knead. Now, if you were doing the same recipe and you wanted to be even healthier, you could have used whole wheat flour and the plain flour, the cream flour. So it's 50% of each. So I often would make mine with whole wheat flour as well, because it gives a lovely nutty texture. So that's giving you a few options as well with this particular recipe. The next thing is, how do we shape it? When you think back, all these generations ago, this was cooked over the open fire. The heat was coming in from underneath here. How did they cook it on the top? What they did was they spun it like this. They had a flat black plate that hung over the fire, and then they just pressed the dough down like this. And they spun it like that and pressed it like that. And then they would get a knife. We get a knife here. We get this nice knife here for you. And they would cut down into the dough like this. Now, I apologize to all the Irish people listening, but my grandmother used to say that was to let the fairies out. But that was my grandmother for you. She was always joking us, but it meant to bring you good luck. I really think that's what she meant. But I'm sorry now, that sounds very, very Irish, doesn't it? But there is actually a total reason why she did it. She would cut it down like this, and then she would cut it across like this. And then she would prick each quarter like that. Now, why did she do that? When this was over the open fire, the heat came from underneath. So how was it going to bake inside? So by making these incisions, you're letting the heat get in. So therefore, you're drying out your dough. So this was a very important technique. And this is what gives you that classic Irish shape. The other thing that I didn't touch on when I was saying about putting the liquid in, it's about getting the texture right. If you can see here, you see, it's not solid firm. It's just a little springy, but it's not tacky. That's very, very important. So if your dough, if you put in a little bit too much liquid, do balance it out with a tiny bit of flour. I hope you wouldn't have gone too far with it, because if your dough is too wet and you pop it in the oven, rather than this rising into a loaf, it actually cooks outwards. So you'll have more of a pancake style loaf and you'll be a bit disappointed in it. So it's very important to get that part of it right. So these incisions are crucial for this part of the recipe. And then your oven should already be preheated. So in your recipe, if you want to check there, I've given you 2 different temperatures. So I start the oven on a slightly higher temperature just to get a brownness on the loaf. And then I turn it down and I just let the loaf dry out. And that's why it's important to get this texture right. Before I pop this onto my tray, the other thing I want to tell you about this is you can actually make scones with this. Now that's, when I say scones, I mean scones, not stones, because a lot of people don't like scones because they think they're like stones. But with this particular recipe, if you hadn't made your incisions, you could flatten that a little bit more to about 1 inch high. And you simply get a circular scone cutter and just cut out your scones. And then you could egg wash them and bake them in the oven. And they freeze brilliantly as well. So, and then you've got individual portions. So if there's only 2 of you in the household, you could make your scones and keep them in the freezer and then just warm them up in the oven when you want them. With this bread though, I'm going to pop this now into the oven, and I have my oven tray ready here. So here it is. And I just put a little bit of baking parchment on it, or you could just simply put, if you didn't want the baking parchment, let me show you an alternative. You take off your baking parchment and you get a little bit of extra flour. And it's important not to over flour the base. So you just hold a little bit in your fingers and you just literally zigzag up and down, a very light dusting. You could, of course, use cornmeal either. That would give you a nice crunchy texture underneath. But this is it. It's just a very light dusting of flour. And that just, in case the bread is anyway tacky, that just stops it from sticking to your tray. So we can get this now into the oven, like so. Just shape it out. Ordinarily now I would cut it on the tray. Now I'm going to bring it over to you and just show you so that you can actually see. Wait for the light to adjust there. So that there is our loaf. So it's more oval shape. And you have your incision and then you have each quarter pricked. So I think it should look really nice. So that goes into the oven and we let that bake. And then maybe with a few more while I'm tidying up.
Just a question while you're there. How deep are you cutting the top?
So I went in, that is about 2 inches high. And I went in a good 3/4 of an inch down into it. Because you'll see when it bakes, then it bakes out into 4 quarters as well, which is really nice, Anna, because you can then just cut 1 quarter and freeze the other 3 as well. So it's a practical thing, but it really comes about from the old way of baking the bread. It's very, very traditional. And it always throws me back. Now, my mum also had a totally different recipe. Sorry, I hope I'm not confusing you all. My mother made a wetter dough than that, following the same recipe, but she put more liquid in and she baked it on a lower temperature in a lined loaf tin. And then she was able to just cut her slices. So you have a few options with that recipe as well. So if you have mixed too much liquid in, pull out the loaf tin and pop it into the loaf tin and your recipe will be rescued.
I love it.
So is there any more questions?
Yes, let me, a few other questions that have come in. One question is if a gas or electric oven makes a difference in terms of temperature or baking time.
Yes, I've given you the temperature for the gas as well. Now, you'll have to tell me about your gas ovens, but I grew up on a gas oven. And when I was baking with my mum in the gas oven, the gas comes up from the back across the top. So we used to find that everything browned really quickly on the top and not so much underneath, and you had to keep moving shelf. So I don't know if that's the way with your modern gas ovens, because nowadays here all gas ovens are electric here in Ireland. So with you, if it is one of the gas ovens like I grew up with, you will need to move that just further down the oven away from the direct heat after the first 15 minutes so that it doesn't get too crunchy on top. Generally I would use electric ovens now. And if you're using a fan assisted oven, you'd take about 15% off the cooking temperature, the advised temperature for it, because it's too hot. Interestingly, slight sideline, but when I was just talking about getting the bread might go crunchy on top in the gas oven, if you take your loaf out and you find that it is quite crunchy on top, what my mother and my grandmother always did was they would get the likes of a clean tea towel, run it under the cold tap, squeeze out the excess liquid, and wrap the damp tea towel over the incredibly hot loaf of bread as soon as it came out of the oven. And just that little bit of dampness in the tea towel softens the crust of the loaf. You could also do the same for a sourdough if you don't like your sourdough crust too much. But it softens it, it makes it so much easier for slicing, and it doesn't hurt the roof of your mouth half as much.
So speaking of sourdough, someone had a question about the sourdough bread revival, and actually that was one of our first Slow Food Live sessions on how to make a starter. And I just the question is, how do you think it compares with baking other breads? Have you incorporated sourdough more into your kitchen?
I make some sourdough breads, but funnily, in the last year, as we all know, because of that terrible thing that happened around the world that we're not going to mention, sourdough seemed to take off. You know, it became a big hit on Instagram. But in Germany, you know what became the big hit? Irish soda bread. The Germans could not get enough of the Irish soda bread recipe. Whilst the rest of us were trying to recreate sourdoughs and were minding our starters and afraid to leave the house in case our starter died, the Germans were making this beautiful loaf of bread here.
Maybe we should have started with your session or done both at the beginning. Someone is asking if we can use baking powder in the cake, not soda.
No, you can't. Now, baking powder is for scones. It's a different, it's for a whole different recipe. In Ireland, baking powder is generally for sweet, if you're making cakes or something, you know, more of a treat. But if you're doing soda bread, I know it sounds corny, but it has to be baking soda, because it gives you that distinct taste. So definitely 100% has to be the baking soda.
And last question before I turn it back to you, do you ever bake in cast iron?
Yes, I do actually, and it's wonderful. And there's 2 different pots that I bake in. Traditionally in Ireland as well, the bread would have been made in cast iron. You get a lovely crust on the outside with the cast iron because of the heat of the cast iron. And that is where you use that tip about the damp tea towel, 100%, because it just softens the crust and makes it so nice. The other thing I do is, instead of cast iron, I bake in a Pyrex bowl. And I say that very carefully because with our cooking school and our bed and breakfast, we get a lot of visitors over from the United States. And I said before about making your bread in a Pyrex bowl. And I got an email back from a lady about a month later and said, Catherine, I've been to every store in my locality and nobody has a Pyrex bowl. So the poor lady was going all over her local shops looking for a pirate's bowl. Let me see if I have one of those bowls to show you. I do. Here. Sorry, you're getting information overload now as I root through my cupboards. Try not to break them. This is the bowl. Bread is delicious made in that. So you just oil it or butter it first, and then you put your dough in. Absolutely gorgeous in one of those, and then wrap it in your tea towel. Get a lovely finish on it. So it's a different style, different finish than the one we're making today. You wouldn't make the traditional shape because obviously that's circular. But let me show you. Here's the one I made earlier, as they say. So if I bring this over to you, this is cool, so I can handle it well. Here's the loaf. Can you see it? And can you see the way the cross opened out in it? And it's expanded a little bit, and you can see the beautiful melted cheddar in there, and you can see the flecks of herb, and you can see the sun-dried tomato. Doesn't that look gorgeous? So we can cut that loaf now. So let me get my chopping board. I'm hiding all the washing up down this end so you don't have to see it. I'm an expert at hiding the washing up, I have to say. So I just cut a little bit of this here. Now, how do you know your loaf is done? You pick up your loaf. Now, it will be very hot from the oven. You turn it over and you go. Can you hear the hollow? That's it. There we go. And then we're going to cut some of the bread. I don't think you'll be at all disappointed in this bread. It smells divine. But you can't go wrong with Irish cheese and butter in it. So there you go. This is it. Just wait for the light to adjust. Absolutely lovely. Now, the next thing we're going to do is serve it up. So we've got a little bit of it here, and then we'll cut a few slices for ourselves. This is quintessentially Irish. And you know, I make a TV show over here in Ireland called Taste Like Home. And it's actually on Amazon Prime, if you think of it, of watching it. But it's where I take a recipe from Ireland abroad to a family that have emigrated, or somebody who's emigrated who misses their flavors of home. And I have been to a few places in the US with this particular TV series. And in one, I was bringing a special lobster salad from Donegal. And when I got there, I served the lobster salad with Irish soda bread. The gentleman on the receiving end, he hadn't been back in Ireland, I think, in about 20 odd years. And he went, the lobster salad is delicious, but oh my goodness, that soda bread throws me back to my childhood in my mother's kitchen. So that's what this does for me here today as well. So I want to lift this up now and show you our delicious cheddar. So I have our naturally aged cheddar here on our board. I have just some grapes to go with it. I have some walnuts. I have our homemade tomato relish here from Ballyknocken. So I make that with apples, some tomatoes, a bit of garlic, herbs, vinegar, a bit of sugar, a bit of salt, and so on. It's a very slow cook it, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And there you have your caramelized leek and your naturally sharp, truly grass-fed cheddar cheese. So I hope this is something that you will make at home and really, really enjoy it.
Catherine, you are making a lot of people very hungry right now, including myself. This is fantastic. We have a bunch of more questions if this is a good time.
I have all the time in the world.
Okay. So one question that happened a little earlier on is about dried herbs, and wondering, can you substitute those nice fresh herbs for dried herbs? And if you do, how do you adjust the quantity?
So the dried herbs, if they're good quality dried herbs, they tend to be a bit stronger in flavor. So I usually put in about half the quantity of dried herbs to fresh herbs. Herbs that are very nice dried, tarragon is lovely dried, and oregano holds its flavor quite well, and thyme also holds its flavor quite well. So you could use any of those for sure.
And we just had a few questions saying, did the sauteed leeks go into the bread? We missed the sauteed leeks. I think you snuck them in there. But
yes,
can you
I
explain
did.
when to add
So
those?
what I did was, I still have the leeks here in the pan. I turned the heat off so the noise wouldn't bother you. But I actually had already made the leeks earlier. So I had them, if anybody remembers me with this particular bowl, I had that in my hand at one stage. The leeks were in that, and I put them in and I rubbed them into the flour. I put the leeks in, and then I put in my thyme and I put in my sun-dried tomatoes all around the same time. The reason I didn't want to use the hot leek straight from the pan is that it can, unless you're working really quickly and not talking when you're working, if you know, the hot leeks can start the bicarbonate of soda or the baking soda to activate. And you need to work really fast and get your bread into the oven really quickly if you're using hot leeks.
How long does it take for those leeks to caramelize?
Mine took about a good 15 minutes on a low heat. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Can you talk some about what are the common mistakes people make with soda bread and how do you troubleshoot those?
So first thing is you got to weigh your ingredients really well. Second thing, it's very important to aerate. Third thing, rub the butter in really, really well. Very important. You don't want lumps of butter in there. You want it to be spread to get a lovely smooth mix. The next thing is you need to one-hand mixing. So remember I mentioned that if you put two hands in, if you end up with two hands in that dough, you cannot help yourself. You'll start kneading the dough and then you'll start pushing out all the air and you will end up with a very dense dough. So whilst it might be a bit difficult first time round because it seems like a lot of flour with only one hand to mix it, but one hand mixing using your fingertips and don't squeeze it, you're stirring like that. That's important to keep your dough soft. And then the other thing that can go wrong is too much liquid, Anna. So it's very important that you put the liquid in bit by bit as you mix by hand. And that is why you don't use a wooden spoon. Because if you go in with a wooden spoon, you've no idea, is there a wet patch somewhere? Is there a dry patch somewhere? And you end up over mixing and may very well end up having too wet a dough at the same time. Sorry, there's probably way too many tips for you all to remember, but we have been recorded, so hope you can play it back.
You just rattled those off like you've seen a lot of these mistakes over the years.
Yeah, and I was afraid to mention to measure the soda exactly. You remember that part. Okay. It's not 11 teaspoons.
Yeah, Carol is commenting here that it sounds like Southern biscuits. And I wonder if you've seen other like similar kinds of cuisines throughout the world that remind you of Irish soda bread.
Yeah, Carol's right. It's quite like the Southern biscuits, especially if you cut them into the scone format. Yeah.
When you're making scones, you said it's a similar recipe. Do you change anything else in terms of, you know, what add-ins you put in, or, you know, you added the egg wash, but is there anything else that makes it different from a scone?
I can use the exact same recipe for the scone. The only thing is I have to flatten it a bit more. So that went, my dough or my bread went into the oven there and it was nearly 2 inches high. When I'm making a scone out of the same dough, it's only 1 inch high, 2.5 centimeters for anybody who's in Europe listening to me. Because if you have your scones too high, and especially if you have a smaller cutter, they go up and they go over. So it's important that they're only about 1 inch high because then they rise just to the right amount. And then you've got a crispy top, crispy bottom, and when you break them open, you still have some substance inside.
And in terms of eating this wonderful bread, is there a time of day that you usually eat soda bread, or is it an all-day affair?
Soda bread would be typical at breakfast. So we would have a brown soda bread at breakfast, which is absolutely gorgeous. And you'd often have that maybe with a little bit of asparagus and smoked salmon, or you might have it with some poached eggs. It's very popular, or sometimes just with jam. You can have it with lunch with a bowl of soup, which is really, really nice. And then it's, I mean, people just make sandwiches with it as well. You know, it's a very versatile bread, and you can see it's a very quick bread. Irish baking is quite quick because we only use either baking soda or baking powder traditionally. We do use, of course, now yeast to make sourdoughs and everything, but our traditional would be just quick breads.
Wonderful. I wanted to read a comment that Mary put in the chat, and that's really interesting in terms of slow living. She said a lot of Ireland, the slow movement has to do with taking the time to appreciate what's around, to see what's there and not take things for granted. She says she was from a farming background, but she now lives in a city. It's all about working with nature, recognizing the seasons and the associated jobs of planting, nurturing, harvesting, planning, and resting. And I wonder if you could just reflect on that and how you experience that on your farm and in your daily life.
Absolutely, I agree with Mary totally, and that's so beautifully put, Mary. Thank you for sharing that. For us here on the farm, it really is about appreciating nature. It's about taking each day as it comes. It's about, I suppose, working with nature, taking what we can from nature within reason. For example, if I'm out foraging for blackberries, which are in season here at the moment, as are elderberries, it's very important that I leave plenty for the little birds. You know, when I'm gardening in my vegetable garden and in my herb garden, I always leave some herbs and vegetables to go to flower, because when they go to flower, the bees are kept happy. And, you know, and I always plant some beautiful flowers as well around those gardens too, so the butterflies can live well. So it is all about understanding that the world isn't ours, it belongs to the humans and the insects and the birds and the animals, and that we are just caretakers of our environment for the next generation and the next generation to come. And it is about appreciating that. And once you stand back and go, yes, I've something to give back here, that's really when you start living slow. It's really when you start appreciating it all.
I love that. I think we often talk about nature as something separate from ourselves, whereas we are part of nature. We are part of our environment.
And you'll see as well here in Ireland, like we mentioned about the dairy farmers, the cattle farmers, the animal husbandry here is wonderful on the dairy farms, and the care and attention that's taken into, you know, looking after the animals and producing the best quality and looking after the land so it is the best quality for the animals. It's a very, very important story in our Irish food production, I have to say.
I have some of this cheddar cheese here. I'm excited to crack this open. Can you talk about why cheddar cheese in particular is an Irish product?
Yeah, but cheddar cheese is an everyday product in Ireland. We have a love affair with cheddar cheese. I will tell you a funny story. I did say to you, my husband is Italian, right? When he came over to Ireland first, many moons ago, I took him out for a pizza. And so we're in this little Irish Italian pizza restaurant, and out came the pizza, and he looked at it and he went, "That's not mozzarella." And I went, yeah. And then he called the waiter over and he said, "Excuse me," he said, "there's not mozzarella on my pizza." And the waiter went, "Yeah, it's cheddar cheese, it's Irish mozzarella," and walked away. So we are totally obsessed with cheddar cheese. It goes on to everything here in Ireland. It's very much part of, I suppose, our flavor profile, and we love it. And I particularly love the fact that, like, in my household, the house is divided in two. I'm a naturally sharp person, whereas my son is very much a naturally aged person. So it's great to have the choice as well. The naturally sharp is lovely with crackers and your soda bread and, you know, your grapes, and for picking and just, you know, having that little kind of Irish tapas evening. Whereas this one, it's for your pizzas.
Okay, I was going to ask how you use the two differently. So you put that on pizza?
No, I was being glib. No, I use it for anything. But you know what is very popular in my household? When my soda bread is a day old, so it's best eaten fresh on the day or freeze it when it's fresh. But when it's a day old, I would often toast that, and then I would put a little bit of relish on top, and then I would put my cheese on and put it back under the grill. Oh my goodness. I mean, wait till you do your cheese toasties next week, but
yes,
it's to die for.
I was going to say, do you, we also, you know, have that compound butter session coming up. Do you do any compound butters on the farm?
We do. Yeah, we do. For our breakfast here in our bed and breakfast, we have out on the menu always a cinnamon. So it's a sweet compound butter, cinnamon, powdered sugar, and orange. So cinnamon orange compound butter. And all we do to make it is we use in this case, we use the unsalted butter, and we put in some powdered sugar, zest of orange, and maybe not as much cinnamon. I know you prefer more cinnamon over in the US. So I just put in just a strong pinch of cinnamon, mash it all together. And then you can roll compound butters up in this, the likes of your baking parchment. And then you can actually freeze them. And you can just cut slices of them from frozen. And then you take your hot sweet scones from the oven, and then you put a slice of your frozen orange cinnamon butter on top. Lovely.
That sounds amazing.
Also,
okay.
if I have leftover herbs, Anna, I will use the leftover herbs and make a compound butter. So lemon zest, my leftover herbs all chopped up. And then if I'm cooking off some fish for dinner, again, I'll take from the freezer just a slice of the compound butter, put it over the lovely hot fish, and it melts, and I get an instant sauce.
Amazing. That sounds so delicious. I have a question that came in about what main course would you serve with this soda bread? If you think about other, you have a lovely cheese board there, but what other dishes complement the soda bread?
So it wouldn't normally, you wouldn't often see soda bread with a main course per se. So it's unlike in Italian cuisine where you'd often have bread with your main course. In Ireland, the bread would mostly come with your soup or your starter. So a smoked salmon starter would be very popular with the likes of soda bread, or a beautiful homemade soup. So we would make any kind of soups here. Here in our house, we make a duo of soups. So I make a carrot and cumin soup, and I make a spinach soup, and I pour them in the center and they meet in the middle, and you get that beautiful orange green soup, and it looks amazing. So I would definitely serve these with soups, and any kind of a salad. A beautiful goat's cheese and beetroot salad around this time of the year with some caramelized walnuts will be fabulous with the soda bread too.
Amazing. And I guess my last question is if you have, if you could share a little more about your connection with Truly Grassfed and why you care about grass-fed cheeses and butters and this concept of slow dairy.
For me, having grown up here on the farm, I totally understand where food comes from. And I've always, I suppose, been in my blood, food production's in my blood, and I understand the importance of quality food production. And I know the company very well, Truly Grassfed, and my family have over the years sold milk to them to make the butter and the cheese. So for me, I feel a strong affinity to it. But most importantly, it's about the animal welfare. It's about the really high quality product. It's about knowing the source of the food, and it's about the flavor of the food. It's the flavor of the butter is gorgeous. The cheese is beautiful. It's a prized premium product, and it is so worth it, I have to say. And it's beautiful to work with as well. As a cook and as a chef, it's wonderful to work with.
Amazing. We love talking about the flavor and deliciousness of food and why good farming practices and good focusing on biodiversity contributes to this amazing flavor. And so that we call it the joy and justice coming together really makes a delicious eating experience. So I wanted to see if there's any other questions that could come in on the chat or comments even that I can share back with Catherine. You're getting a lot of fan mail here in the chat, people wanting to come visit you. And just Jennifer Ford is saying here, what a nice session. Thank you for taking the time this evening. So I wanted to express that back to you. People are excited to try making it. But any last words that you want to share, Catherine?
I just really hope everybody gets the chance to actually make this bread. You will not regret it. Try the beautiful products, make the bread, and just transport yourself to Ireland. Close your eyes and pretend you're sitting having a picnic in the beautiful green pastures of Ireland. And with any luck, please God, this time next year, I might see you here in Ireland. Come and visit us here in County Wicklow. We'd love to welcome you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It looks like you have some people ready to cook like you tomorrow. Sabo says, Carol says, this was wonderful. So much content out there, but this was exceptional. And thank you for sharing your goodness. So thank you so much, Catherine. We appreciate you joining us for Slow Food Live today. Thank you to Truly Grassfed for helping make this possible. And check out our next sessions. We have some really exciting sessions coming up. We put the chat in the link, or it's on our website, slowfoodusa.org. And let's stay in touch.
Thank you so much. It was such an honor. Thank you for hosting me. Bye, Anna.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye,
See
bye.
you in Ireland soon.
See you in Ireland.
Oh, and don't forget to download the recipe, and you'll see images of here and the farms and everything on the recipes as well.
Beautiful.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you so much. Take care. Bye.
Bye.